Welcome back to the Biblical Justice Resources podcast. Multiple times throughout the course of this podcast, tragic events related to the topic of an episode have occurred in the time between when an interview was recorded and an episode was released. That has once again happened with this episode. As you'll hear again later, the interview for today's episode was recorded on June 30th. Since that date, 2 people have been shot and killed by federal immigration enforcement agents in the United States. Lorenzo Salgado Araujo, who was killed in Houston on July 7th, and a 26-year-old man who has yet to be officially identified, who was killed in Biddeford, Maine, just hours before I recorded this introduction on July 13th. Our conversation today was not intended to focus on the violence and death that have become associated with immigration enforcement, but it is a reality we cannot ignore. As ever, we offer prayers for the victims. But what does it look like to pursue and effect change in this moment? What we're seeing is happening around the country, and not just in major metropolitan areas. While the immigration enforcement surge here in Minnesota was named Operation Metro Surge, activity was not contained to the metro. ICE was seen around the state, including rural cities and towns. With this in mind, I wanted to have a conversation with someone who could speak both to caring for immigrant communities in rural areas and to what it looks like to pursue justice in rural America. We'll have that conversation today with our guest, Jenny Groen. Jenny is the Willmar Area Programs Manager for Arrive Ministries, which is a local affiliate of World Relief. In her work, she seeks to extend biblical welcome to all refugee and immigrant neighbors and engage the church in loving their immigrant neighbors well. She is passionate about creating spaces where people can come together, celebrate what makes each person and culture unique, connect on what we all share in common, learn from each other, and work together towards a flourishing community. Through our conversation, you'll learn more about how perceptions can change with interpersonal interactions, what it looks like to care and advocate for immigrants in rural America, and how the call to pursue justice is distinctly connected to a Christian understanding of human dignity. Now, if you will, join me for this conversation with Jenny Groen. My name's Eric, and this is the Biblical Justice Resources podcast. Our conversation will begin right after this. The Biblical Justice Resources podcast is supported by listeners like you at patreon.com/biblicaljusticeresources. If you're interested in supporting the podcast and helping to resource individuals and the church for the pursuit of biblical justice, please consider giving today at patreon.com/biblicaljusticeresources. Again, visit patreon.com/biblicaljusticeresources to help support the podcast. Now on with the show. Jenny, thank you for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
So as I was just telling you, I've been looking forward to talking with you both about immigration and the work you've been doing with immigrants and refugees, but also because you are living in a more rural context than I think both a lot of people who we've already had on the podcast and maybe who people would think are involved in working for justice in the world. So I'm curious if you can just kind of talk about where you live, kind of the setting you're in, what that area looks like.
Yeah, so I live in Willmar, Minnesota, which is pretty much right in the middle of the state, about 2 hours west of the metro area. We are a smaller city, about 20,000-ish. And then we're just in the middle of farm country. So all around us is farming. So lots of small towns. We're like the big city that everybody goes to get their groceries. So everyone, 15, 20-minute drive, you can get to Willmar and you can have your Target, your Walmart, your grocery stores, and your restaurants. So we're kind of in the middle of, just really rural area. And we have a super diverse city that we live in here.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing with being in central Minnesota, that people may not realize how much diversity there is somewhere like Willmar, or even, anywhere kind of in those more rural town sorts of places. My wife and I were just driving through Long Prairie, I think, which is maybe an hour and a half north of you, and saw a Mexican restaurant. It's like,
Yep.
yeah, there are people living all over the place from all sorts of different places. Even to the point where so my grandparents live out. My grandpa's actually in Wilmer right now at a facility, but my grandma, when I was growing up, taught ESL in Wilmer.
Oh,
So
yeah.
English as a second language taken on different terms now, but
Mm-hmm.
it's like didn't think about it when I was a kid, but now it's like, oh, there was a reason those classes were needed, is because there were people coming from different places who didn't speak English who were coming to live and work in and around Wilmer. So I think for people who are not aware that that's people move all over the place, that's one great step, I think. You now are working for Arrive Ministries. How did you end up coming to Arrive, and what does your role look like now in Wilmer?
Um, the way I got here is a pretty long story, so I will try to shorten it as much as I can. But basically, my husband and I moved back to Wilmer's our hometown. We moved back here after having lived overseas in Haiti, um, and we moved back 2011. And we had left in 2001. We didn't live in Haiti that whole 10 years, but we were gone for 10 years. And when we came back, there was significant changes in Wilmer. We'd always had some immigration here, but mostly from Mexico, a few other countries, but mostly from Mexico. And most of the people who had moved here had lived here for a long time. So we didn't have a ton of like new immigration happening. But when we moved back after having been gone for 10 years, we had a huge influx of people from several different countries. And so for us, that was a really exciting prospect that we had new people in our city, that we had some diversity that we didn't have before. Specifically, we had people moving here from East Africa, Somalia, Kenya, Ethiopia, as well as Burma. And so we were really excited about this change because we thought this is going to be just a huge positive for our city to have this increased diversity. So right off the bat, we started looking at ways that we could interact with our immigrant community, get to know some of these newer neighbors that we'd never met before. So we were interested in just kind of forming relationships and friendships back in 2011. So we started doing things to foster those relationships. Some part of it was just going downtown and hanging out because a lot of those newest neighbors had opened businesses. So there were new restaurants and grocery stores and things along those ends downtown. So we started just spending a ton of time interacting with people just where they were. But it was really hard to actually get to know people that way. You could, start to recognize some of the store owners, start to wave and say hi. But that like genuine relationship part was really difficult, partially because there's language barriers, but there's also cultural barriers. And there's also like, what do you do together? You can go hang out and kind of walk past each other and say hi, but beyond that, what do you do? So we started hosting some sewing classes with a group of friends and just invited some of our refugee neighbors to come and sew together and learn how to use an electric sewing machine. And so that sort of started our work towards like doing more of a intentional outreach into the community, I would say, more than just showing up in spaces. We were trying to foster spaces where like our community could come together and get to know each other within those places. So when Arrive Ministries decided to open a site here, I was already doing some of that work and just saw it as an opportunity to have more support, more programming, more staff on board to kind of take what we had been doing on the side and make it my full-time thing. So I was really excited. I did resist taking the job at first because I was like, no, this is just my life. This is ministry. This is what I love. I don't want it to be my job because then it changes it. But after praying and after meeting with Arrive staff, just realized this is such a natural fit for where my heart, where my passion lies for our community, and to not do it, to like pass up the opportunity to kind of be that bridge builder and to have all the support that I needed to do that. I was like, I can't pass that up. Like, there's no way. So took the job with Arrive. Yeah, goodness, I have to do math in my head. 4.5, almost 5 years ago. Yeah, and here we are.
Well, yeah. So we'll get into kind of talking about refugee resettlement and what has changed with that in the last year and a half or so. But
Yeah.
so alongside of that, what else are you doing with Arrive? What sorts of things were you doing that kind of continued, and what are new things from just sort of living life before you were with Arrive to now are job responsibilities or services that are offered or things like that?
Yeah. So our sewing classes have continued, which means we've had sewing classes happening in Wilmer for 11 years now, which is pretty awesome. So those have continued. Those has continued to be a really popular thing. Every Monday, women come here to sew together. And some of those ladies have also been coming to the class for 11 years. So how cool is that? Like, that long-term relationship got to continue. We also have English classes here. I do not teach any of them, but we have volunteers who do. So we host a bunch of different English classes. We do a moms group that meets and just gets to know each other, supports each other. We have a cooking group that we share recipes from whatever country we are from and whatever family we're from, whatever's important food to our culture, we share with each other and cook together. And then we do a variety of different educational things. We had a technology class this year. We had a water safety course where women learned how to swim. So we do a variety of educational things, and those usually stem from what we're being told in community is needed or wanted. And so we kind of we let the community take the lead on that and tell us what they would like to learn. And then I facilitate finding people who are able to teach those things, or if it's something I can teach, I'll teach it. So we do a variety of things like that. And then we have some support programs as well. Newly arrived families, we provide a welcome kit and furniture and beds for them. And so we'll help them set up their apartment. If they come and they have only a suitcase full of clothing, we'll make sure that they have everything they need to kind of start life here. And then we have a monthly support as well for families that financially just need that little bit of extra help. And so we give diapers and toilet paper and kind of basic hygiene essentials. Once a month, we have families come in and meet with us and then pick up whatever it is that they need for their family to kind of keep things rolling for the month. So we do a variety of stuff, some direct services, some just relationship building.
Yeah. How much of that happens in conjunction with churches in Wilmer? Like, what does the church relationship look like out there?
I mean, everything happens in conjunction with the churches because we really can't do what we do without the support of churches and the support of volunteers. So like I said, all of our English classes are taught by volunteers from churches. Most of our other programming is funded by either churches or individual donors in Wilmer, as even down to like the rolls of toilet paper that we give away. Almost every single one of them, not almost, every single one of them is donated by somebody local. So the church, I would say it's a combination of church and community support, because there are some people who support what we do who don't go to one of our local churches. So I don't want to leave them out of our supporters. And then all of our summer programming that we do, which I didn't mention, we do summer camps all summer long in a variety of the neighborhoods. And all of those are church sponsored. So a church takes on a neighborhood and they just show up week after week and play with kids and read books and do bubbles and stuff like that. So all of that is done by local churches.
That's cool. But it does lead me to a question. I think now we get into some more difficult conversations maybe about sort of perceptions of those relationships and how people feel about other people in their community. Because I think it's pretty, I feel like there is widespread belief maybe or understanding that more rural parts of the country are less welcoming to people who are different from them, whatever sort of people that may be. what, as much as you're able to talk about, I guess, to not get you in trouble or anything like that with people who are in your community,
Yeah.
what do relationships, how do people maybe generally broadly perceive immigrant communities, and maybe like do people in Wilmer or kind of who you work with separate like immigration broadly versus the people who I know in my community?
Oh, that is such a good question. I do think that oftentimes if people are talking negatively about immigration or they have a negative viewpoint on a certain people group, they almost always will say, but it doesn't apply to so and so person that I know, right? And so I think there is this disconnect between immigrants and the people who live next to me. And in Wilmer, it is very, very hard to live here and not have interaction with someone from the immigrant community because we have one public school. So if you go to public school, your kid is in class with people from all over the world and you're sitting next to them at events and whatever else. If you go to our grocery stores, like it's you really can't avoid each other here unless you're trying really, really hard, which some people do. Unfortunately, we do have that piece who just they want to live their separate lives. They don't want anything to do with it. I think that's a different category. But then we have a category of people who, like you said, they will look at their neighbor and they will love them and they will understand their story. They will want them to stay. And they will be shocked if I tell them that that immigration policy that you're advocating for would actually mean that that person that you love will have to leave. They'll say, no, 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 it doesn't apply to them. Certainly it doesn't apply to them. And so there is this disconnect between the broader immigration narrative and the people that we know. I almost never have someone say, I want this immigration policy to change because I want so and so out of here. No one ever says that. It's always, I want this immigration policy to change because it certainly doesn't apply to the people that I know.
Yeah.
And so, yes, huge disconnect there.
Have you had conversations to like I don't know how effective it is to try and educate people and be like, no, actually this is the way things work, and have them either pick up on that or fully understand or anything. I mean, it's hard for people who are in the work, I think, sometimes to understand the immigration policy of the United States just broadly. So what do conversations look like when they come up?
Um, I do a fair amount of trying to explain, but I usually explain through an individual story. So if we're talking about the southern border and what happens at the southern border and what an illegal crossing looks like, I will tell people a story of someone I know. I won't ever give names or enough details for them to know who that person is, but I'll tell them a story. You know, I know this person and this was their story. This is what it looked like for them to cross the border, and give them a connecting point to a person and a story that maybe helps them broaden their perspective on whatever it is we might be talking about. If we're talking about the ending of TPS, I'll try to explain what is TPS, first of all, temporary protected status, but then what people does it apply to, and why would they have to leave, and then where would they be going back to? And so always trying to connect that broader thing. Yes, doing some education around it, but then connecting it to a real person, a real story, a real situation. And that really helps people just shift on what they think about things. And I would say I do see people shift. I have seen people shift within a conversation in real time. And by the end of it, be crying and hugging me and saying, I'm so sorry, I didn't understand this. What can I do to help? So there are days where I feel like there is no room for change and no one cares and no one wants to listen. They just want to believe what they believe. And then there's those moments like that where I see like everybody's hearts still want to do the right thing. And so when you're able to kind of break through with a real story of a real person, that's where I see change happen. And especially if they can meet and connect with a real person, then I see people change their minds all the time because now they have someone that it's affecting.
Yeah. I'm curious to know how that was impacted by what happened at the start of this year. So for the listeners, as we're recording, it's the last day of June. We're 4, 5, 6 months removed from Operation Metro Surge, which did not stay in the metro. It spread across the state of Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm curious, first, before that happened and before the last year and a half of rhetoric and policy from this current administration, what did you what did what did change look like? Because I think that rhetoric exists. That rhetoric has existed for more than 10 years now from current leadership in Washington.
Mm-hmm.
So what did this look like prior to the very intense situation we all experienced?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So I guess when it comes to when you see a person change their perspective or
Mm-hmm.
change, like, move into what can I do to help this community, how did
Yep.
that look prior to the events of this year?
Yeah, I think prior to the events of this year, when I would kind of see people shift or change their perspective on immigration, it would be mostly through those relationships with real people. But there was never a sense of, oh, maybe the government was wrong on this, or maybe I'm not being told the full story here. It was more of a, I've shifted how I see this person. And I just think that the broader narrative doesn't apply to them, if that makes sense. Like I can see this person in front of me who has clearly immigrated here and maybe would fit into the broader national narrative that's negative against immigration, but like they don't apply. But the rest of the country, the rest of the people, probably it's still true about them.
Yeah.
Um, and so I would see individuals change in their perspective on individual people, but not change their perspective on the broader narrative. Still believe that the narrative is true. It just doesn't apply to this person, because now I know this person and they're actually really great and they're, contributing to our community, and she's a wonderful mom and like everything, she deserves to be here. And so we really want her to stay. But the majority of people aren't like her.
Yeah. And then how has that changed since? I think I have multiple questions related to this in my mind,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't want to ask them all at once, but I think just a couple of them that come to mind are like, are there people who 5 years ago you wouldn't have expected to get involved or get into action that who came into action at the start of this year? Are Did you see more people change their opinions as things got more intense? And maybe some also, like, did you see people who dug further in who were like, no, this is what is happening is right and this is what needs to be happening? So
Mm-hmm.
I realize I'm asking all of those at the same time,
Yeah,
but
no,
maybe
it's
just
good. It's
starting
good
off,
to know
whatever.
kind of where we're going with the
Yeah,
conversation. No, that's helpful.
whatever you
Um,
have that comes to mind to start us off here.
yeah. Okay. Let me think through that a second. I think we saw a variety of things happen, really. So there was this piece of it where we were hearing a national narrative about, we heard a national narrative about Somalis, specifically. And we have a large Somali population here in Wilmer. And there are still those that are very prejudiced against that group of people. But there is a much, much larger group who knows them, who are their neighbors, and who love them and care about them. And so when that national narrative was happening, I think there was a shift in our community of people saying, that's not right. That we know these people. Like, that is not what's going on here. And so we see them as contributors to our community. We see them as neighbors that we want here. We see them opening businesses. We see them good, like they're good for the economy of our city. And so as the national narrative was happening in real time, people were realizing that it wasn't true. And so some chose to just shut it off and dig in deeper. Others chose to question whether or not they had been believing something that wasn't true. And And then others, it just gave us more of a like, we need to be bolder in our support of our immigrant community, because we might be supporting them quietly, kind of behind closed doors, maybe writing some emails, but we need to be publicly, boldly supporting them, because they are being publicly and boldly called out, and they are being targeted. And so we saw kind of everything happen all at once, if that makes sense. But definitely when arrests started happening here and we saw who was being arrested, for some people that just tore down every wall that they had up, wanting to believe that they were only going to arrest people who were here illegally. They were only going after the criminals. They were just trying to make our community safer. There were those that wanted so badly to believe that that was true. And if that was true, those of us who were advocating for the change wouldn't have been fighting as hard as we were, but it wasn't true. And so when people started getting arrested in Wilmer by federal immigration enforcement agents, it was so clear to us that they were not going after people who were here illegally or just criminals, and that they were not trying to make our community safer, because we knew the people they were arresting and we knew they didn't fit that demographic at all. And so when the first person that's arrested is someone that has been a contributor to your community for over 20 years, everyone knows that person's not a criminal. When the person most publicly arrested is a 19-year-old high school girl, everyone knows she's not a criminal. And so you had to come face to face with that reality pretty quickly here, because it was not anonymous people. It wasn't people we didn't know. These were people we knew being arrested. And so the national narrative suddenly did not line up with our lived reality at all, and everybody knew it. So you had to come to terms with it. You could not ignore it. And I think a lot of people who were kind of holding out hope that they were going to do what they said they were going to do, in those moments changed their minds on it and said, it's not what they're doing. I hoped that that's what they were going to do. I hoped that they were just trying to make our community safer, but that's not what's happening. And so we know it's not what's happening. We can't keep believing something that's not true. We are seeing it with our own eyes.
Yeah. That's an interesting thing as I'm sitting here listening to you talk about it. Just, I think narratively in this country, we have like small towns become this more tight knit, everyone knows everyone sort of place compared to what larger cities look like. And so here, like in the cities, I don't know that I don't know how many people in Minneapolis, St. Paul personally knew people who were taken, arrested, deported. It seems like, or it sounds like in Wilmer, it is a lot more difficult to say, I didn't know certain people who were involved in the community, when you shrink it down from 2.5 or 3.5 million people down to 20,000 people in town. So that probably is not unique to Wilmer. That probably was happening around the country. And I'm curious to see what will come of the actions that we've seen.
Yeah.
I'm also curious to talk about some of the I don't know if you would call it political advocacy type work that you were involved in, but I think you personally were involved in like letter writing sorts of campaigns and helping like distribute postcards for people to send to elected officials. What kind of did that look like? Because I think that started last year. So what has that process looked like?
Last fall. Oh my gosh, how were we so far away from it? That's kind of crazy. I think when we started seeing some of the changes in immigration law and policy, we saw refugee resettlement shut down. Last January, was it January 2025 when that shut down? Starting to get fuzzy on dates. This year has been a wild one. So when we saw refugee resettlement just completely shut down, like across the board, nobody's being resettled. And then we started seeing some of the other statuses come into question, people who were here with legal, who had come here legally, but some of their statuses were being revoked, their work permits were being revoked. I think we started feeling like this is just an all-out sort of, for lack of a better term, attack on our entire immigrant community, and not just some, but this is going to affect nearly all of them in some way. And refugee resettlement has been something that's been really good for our community. Like, not everyone would agree with me on that, but a lot of people would. And so realizing that this was broader than just, again, going after people who had come illegally or going after people who had a criminal record. But this was just we're going to stop all immigration, and we're going to revoke statuses of those who are already here, who have done everything, quote unquote, the right way. There were a lot of people who were deeply concerned about that piece, just looking around our community and realizing how many people would be affected. So we just put out the call to our community and said, if this is something you're concerned about, let's advocate for our city. Like, we know that immigration is integral to the businesses here, to the way that we operate, to all of it. Like, they're an integral part of our community. And if we lose them, there's a lot of things here that will fail. And so we need our immigrant community to stay, for lack of a better way of saying it. We rely on them. We rely on each other. We can't continue as a community as we are right now without them. And so there were a lot of people who saw that and believed that, no matter who they had voted for, no matter where they went to church, no matter what age group they were a part of, there was a huge group of people who saw that reality and knew that, like, hey, we want our city to actually remain basically how it is right now. Like, we don't want these people gone. So we just sent out texts and emails and invited people from the community to come and get together and do a letter writing day. And we had kind of all of the basic information available for people so they could kind of read up on what are the policy changes that we're advocating for or against, or whatever it may be. And then all of the addresses and phone numbers of our representatives so that they could reach out to them directly. And then we provided all of the resources they needed to write a letter that day. And it was crazy how many people showed up. We did have donuts. I don't know if that was the thing that did it, but we had donuts. So we had over 200 people show up in a matter of hours and write letters and postcards. And we ended up sending, I think our final count was like close to 300 letters and postcards to our elected officials. And then phone calls were also being made during that same time. And the beautiful thing is that our immigrant community also came, because they felt like this was a chance for them to also have a voice in this and to be able to write a letter. And so we had translators available, and they were able to write letters as well, just sharing their thoughts and their feelings on the whole thing. So it was really just a beautiful kind of community support, because anyone who walked in the door could see that, like, there are people from all across the spectrum here. And we all agree on this one thing, that we want our immigrant neighbors to stay in our city. So it was a really beautiful show of support. I don't know if it changed anything or not, but later on in the year, when things started getting really difficult, we did have our elected officials that we had been writing to show up and talk to us. So I have to believe that us being really loud in January made them realize that, like, we actually genuinely care about this, and this isn't the first time we're saying it. So please come talk to us. And they did. Like, we were able to get meetings with, I think, all of our senators and representatives met with us in person at one point in time after doing the letter writing event.
Yeah. That's cool. I mean, the numbers that you said are impressive for anywhere. But from Willmar, it seems like it would be remarkably needle moving. It's probably why people showed up to talk to you. I'm curious. I'm curious a little bit more about some of the interaction with the people in politics. But on the other side of it, for the letter writers, for the people who showed up at the events, Have you seen any sort of ongoing formation? Like, do you feel like that's changed people who were at the event or impacted people who were at the event in some way?
Yeah, I think people who were at the event, a lot of them stuck around and kept supporting, if that makes sense. Like, and they supported in the variety of different ways. Like some of them actually just became volunteers here and started volunteering. And others became like they started bringing donations over, they started buying groceries, they, whatever it might be that was needed. But a lot of people who came for that original letter writing day stuck around this whole last year and a half and are still involved. Like they still show up and support and help out. So, and I think some maybe it moved the needle a little bit for them on like their view on immigration, their view on current immigration policy. For others, this was the first time they knew what we even did. And so it kind of it reached across the aisle both directions. Does that make sense? Like there were some who were like geared up and ready to advocate and ready to write the letters and make the phone calls and march with a sign, but didn't know how to like tangibly do something in their own community. And then there were others who had been already volunteering with us from local churches, but maybe were afraid to kind of cross that aisle into any sort of political advocacy because there's a line there that sometimes you don't want to cross and you don't want to get involved with, or you don't want to stick your neck out. And so it was so interesting to see that it literally crossed the aisle both directions and got some people to take their words and their advocacy and put it into action, and got other people who were doing the action to be willing to step out and now do the advocacy piece. And so we saw both, and that was really cool to see.
Yeah. And then on the interacting with the political officials, elected officials, I
Mm-hmm.
think again broadly narratively you could say that one side of the aisle is more pro and one side of the aisle is more anti. I think in some of the representatives around the state you can see that even more strongly,
Yep.
not just not state level representatives but like the US representatives who have been elected from Minnesota. There are some very different people who have been elected to represent our state. I'm curious less about specific changes, I think, but more about like if you feel like they people were listening to and hearing your concerns and how that would have landed. Because I mean, maybe at the end of the day, some of my cynicism can come in here and say that people will end up just voting with their party to whether they personally have been changing or not. But I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious to know actually interacting with officials what those interactions look like.
Oh, this one is tricky to answer because some of them were private meetings that I'm not allowed to talk about. I
Yeah.
was sworn and I promised I wouldn't talk about them publicly, which those meetings really needed to happen. And so I agreed to privacy on those. Um, so I think that there were in some of those meetings, and in some of the meetings we were just sharing like what's happening real time in our city, what are we seeing, and we had all kinds of people in the room for some of them. I local law enforcement, city council members, like we had people just all sharing as a community like what's going on here, what's really hard about this, what do we need to continue to support our community, what are things that are really not going well right now, and is there anything we can do about it. So in the kind of the height of metro surge, um, we also had the same types of things happening here. Like we had arrests happening on a regular basis. We had visible agents on the street, in our community. And so just getting to talk to everybody at every level of leadership and just talk really openly and honestly about what we're seeing and what's happening, I think was super important, and helped them know the truth of what was happening on the ground. Did it move the needle for some? Yeah, it did. I can't tell you who, but it did. There were some who really, really did listen to what we were saying, and tried really hard to change things, and then also got us meetings with other people. who maybe weren't going to listen to us or didn't want to listen to us, or or whatever it may be. But the other thing that I tried really hard to do at that time, which is something I said earlier, is to tell real stories of real people, so that there was an actual connection to people who live here. And in some of those meetings, I was even able to invite in some of the people who were being affected and let them tell their own story. And so if I can give someone a seat at the table, when like I've been given permission to be in that room and I've been given a seat at the table, um, whenever I get the chance to extend that to someone else, and I don't need to be their voice for them, but I can give them the chance to just be their own voice in the room, I will do that. And so there was a few of those meetings where I was able to do that. I was able to bring in the people that were actually being affected. And so instead of me telling their story, they got to tell their own story. And did we see in the moment that we were being listened to and things were changing? Not necessarily. But what, I mean, you never, not never, you usually don't get a real reaction right then and there when you're sitting at the table. Not with anyone who has to make hard decisions. Like they're going to take it in and they're going to say thank you for your time and they're going to leave and they're going to think about it, hopefully. But I think what it does is no one gets to make a decision and not know the truth now, if that makes sense. You may still make a decision that we don't agree with, but now I know that you know what you're doing. If you're making a decision and you've never heard from anyone who's being affected by these laws or these changes, you've never met anyone who's been arrested, you don't know what detention is like because you don't know anyone who's been detained. There's almost like a, well, you didn't know, and so maybe you didn't mean to do this. But I can hold elected officials accountable when they've sat across from someone, they've heard the horror that they've been through, and then they make their decision after knowing the truth. And so I now know everyone who knows the truth. And so I feel a lot more confident in holding them accountable to that because I know that they know. And I won't let them make those choices for our community without knowing. And they all know now. And so I think for me, even if it doesn't change the way they vote or who they choose to give their support to or whatever bills whatever it is, I know that they know. And that matters. And I feel much more confident holding them accountable moving forward and saying, you know, I will or won't vote based on what I know they know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a really good word, I think. There are so many different places in life where you could be like, now I know that people are making informed decisions one way or another. Like having the knowledge, I think, is a reinforcement even to yourself.
Yep.
I don't have to ask a question about do they, don't they, will they, won't they, so on and so forth. Yep. I know. Yeah.
I know what they know. Yep.
That is so, yeah. That's really powerful, I think. I'm curious, as we're coming closer to the end here, stepping beyond immigration, refugee, resettlement, things of that nature, but just like broadly in the community, thinking about how you understand justice, are there other issues that you see that are either becoming offshoots that people are focusing on or things that people were already focused on that are coming together? What does, outside of everything that we've just talked about in the last 45 minutes, what does interaction pursuing justice, doing that sort of work look like in your community?
I have actually seen huge shifts in this just even since January. Like the amount of people that are paying attention and caring about what justice for everyone in our community looks like is actually super encouraging to me. I think one of the things that people are focusing on, and this is something that people always have focused on, is access to resources, like making sure that everyone, no matter where they came from, how long they've lived here, what language they speak, have equal access to resources, especially food and just like the general like needs of a human. And so I've seen a lot of people push into that area a little bit more and care about it and start asking more questions about it. But also, I have seen a huge push towards more representation within our leadership structure in our city. I've heard so many more conversations around, hey, maybe our school board and our city council should more directly reflect what our city looks like. Because we have a lot of people on in leadership positions right now that look the same as they've always looked for decades and decades and decades, but our city doesn't look the same anymore. And so maybe our leaderships should start reflecting closer to what our city actually looks like. And so I've heard so many conversations around like, how do we give more people a voice? How do we give more people a seat at the table? We have a mayoral and city council vote coming up this year pretty soon in the next couple of months. And there's several candidates who have all of their information in Somali and Spanish. I've not seen that before here. And so even the way that we're communicating, there's so many more organizations and so many more people who are trying to make that communication piece accessible to everybody that they can. And that is a change because we have seen the school do that and some of the medical kind of facilities do that, but we haven't seen it happening within politics, within even just like city events. Like if there's a city event now, the flyer is going to have all three languages on it. If we see an invitation go out to join a committee or to, whatever, show up and have your voice heard at this or that thing. So often I'm seeing that information going out in 3 different languages. And that is a shift for us. And I think a really important shift because that baseline level of access starts with, can you understand the information? And so just to see that small shift, which really isn't small because it is giving a lot more access, happen, I think is going to be a huge move towards justice because for me, justice looks like every person having the same access to things that give them dignity, give them a voice, give them a chance. Like every single person, no matter who they are, having equal access to those things doesn't mean that it's going to play out equally always, but giving everybody the chance at it, I think is super important. So I have seen our city move towards that and like just ramping up those efforts in the last few months, which is amazing because there was this push towards trying to get us to be afraid of our neighbors, trying to get us to want them gone, to want to push them out, to be on the side of getting rid of all of them because then we'll be better off economically, we'll be safer, we'll be whatever the talking point is. And instead, I am seeing a push towards let's give them a seat at the table. That starts with communicating. Let's make sure everybody can access everything. And like, I'm like, good job, Wilmer. Like we said, okay, no, thank you to that. Actually, we're going to bring them in. We want them in leadership. We want to hear what they have to say. We want to make sure that they are actually a part of what we're doing and a part of the decisions that are being made. And so I'm just so proud of the way our community responded in the moment, but then also has shifted towards, hey, like, let's actually do the opposite of that.
Yeah. There's so much to mine in that response as well. When you were talking about making sure resources are available, the first thing I thought about, we talked about it before we started recording, is just the weather. Like it's 100 degrees right now in Minnesota. At the height of Metro surge, it was 20 below. I mean, like we have the possibility to have weather extremes, and just making sure everyone is safe physically is one starting point to think of. But then when you talk about, there are changes that can be made that people could think of as tweaks that invite so many more people in. I mean, when you talk about printing something in 3 languages, you're maybe talking about half an inch of paper that brings hundreds, thousands more people into knowledge, into the ability to access resources, into the ability to interact so that there is not fear of knowing who your neighbor is, because now you're actually able to interact with each other. So there's a lot of cool stuff there. I think maybe just the last thing as we come to the end here is just opening the floor to you to anything else, any other thoughts you have that we haven't touched on that you think would be helpful for people to know.
That's a very open-ended thing. So what have I not said that I would want people to know? Yeah, I think obviously with the name of your podcast, like I can talk about Christianity, right? I think just as Christians and as followers of Christ, so much of this work for me is that God created every single person with that same innate human dignity and value. Every person. And so as Christians, how can we not do the work of biblical justice at the end of the day? Like what your podcast is named, like how can we not do that work? How can we not want to usher in that kingdom sort of justice when that is like the core of who we are? The core of who we are is created in the image of God, and recognizing that image in other human beings, and living in a world that is trying to tell us that some people don't have that same innate human dignity and value. Like, I just feel like every Christian should hear that and know that it's false. Like, if we're following Christ, if we've been forgiven, if we've been brought into grace, we should be able to hear that and know right off the bat that is wrong. And we still might end up voting differently, and we still might end up having differences of opinion on immigration policy, on whatever it might be. But we have to know that if someone is going to tell you that person is worth less than someone else, we have to be willing to stand up and say, we know that's wrong. And so I would just say, if you are a Christian, if you are a follower of Christ, if you are reading your Bible and you want to bring the kingdom of God here on this earth, then there are some things we cannot compromise on. And that includes the way that other human beings are talked about, the way that their value is being diminished. And you can still hold your political views and say every human being is equally valued in the eyes of God, and every human being is made in his image with that dignity and that value. It is part of how we were created. And to be willing to step out and push back against any rhetoric that goes against that, whatever side, whoever it is coming from, I think is essential to us holding on to who we are as Christians in this moment. And so no matter what you believe, no matter what you're going to vote for, no matter what policy end of anything you fall on, that piece of it should be the same for every single one of us.
Amen. Totally, completely agree. Thank you so much for joining. I appreciated that so much, that conversation. So thank you, Jenny, for joining me here.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Every time I was like looking through some of the other podcasts and listening and reading people's credentials or hearing their intro, I was like, why does he want me? I don't have any letters in front of my name. I haven't written any books. I don't preach sermons. I was like, oh, goodness.
I think it's because of that. It's because it's an example of you don't need all of the letters and have the books and all of the everything. Christians are able to pursue justice wherever they are. And so I think that's what's important for people to know. Thanks for watching the Biblical Justice Resources podcast here on YouTube. If you found this episode helpful, insightful, or informative, check out another one of our videos, subscribe for more, or share this with a friend. If you're looking for more resources on how to pursue biblical justice, head over to our website at biblicaljusticeresources.com or check out the show notes below for more links.